Imagine for a moment that all you've ever wanted is an emotionally close relationship with a particular person in your life. They're smart, they're funny, they're kind, and you just adore spending time with them. Not too unusual, right? Healthy, we might even say. But now imagine that if this person were to be available for a relationship, becoming emotionally attached to you, living with you, showering you with affection, you simply wouldn't want it anymore. To be the one, he or she has to be unavailable. And now imagine that your obsession with this person prevents you from completing your work, succeeding academically, forming healthy relationships, or even caring for yourself. Imagine that you bring them up in every conversation with everyone, even when you promised yourself that this time you won't mention them. Imagine that when they go on vacation, you feel a sense of longing physically somewhere in your chest, and all you can think is that you need to see them to relieve it. Your mind is split in two all the time. One piece on the reality of where you are and what you're doing, and the rest filled with intrusive thoughts about this person. Every waking hour. The harder you try to stop thinking about them, the more you can't stop. And so you start to feel shame. And then you think, there's something wrong with me. And there's no one there to tell you anything different. This is what it feels like to have limerence. It's not just falling in love with someone who doesn't love you back. It's more insidious than that. It's a drive to achieve emotional closeness that feels involuntary and out of control. Just like someone who abuses drugs or alcohol will do anything to get that next hit, you will do anything to be close to this person. They're like your security blanket because you're anxious and being near them makes everything okay. I've had sequential episodes of limerence since the age of 4. Intimate relationships tend not to work out for me, even though I'm capable of feeling attraction towards people I'm not limerent for. I have lost close friendships due to the extreme mood swings associated with the condition. I take an antidepressant and self-medicate with caffeine just to be able to focus on work. And I've even had recurrent suicidal ideation. About 5 years ago, I came across the term limerence for the first time. Not from a professor or a mental health professional or a peer-reviewed journal, but from Marie Claire magazine, of all places. And that really speaks to the fact that this condition has not been given the attention and legitimacy that its sufferers need and deserve. And so I started digging around in the literature, and I didn't find much, but I did come across the book that coined the term limerence for us, written by the psychologist Dorothy Tenov in 1979. Reading through it, I realized that I wasn't alone, and the shame that I had felt for years was diminished. I thought, well, this is real, so psychotherapists must know what to do for it. I could get help. And I consulted 2 different therapists, one at a time, and they both tried their best to work with me, but their interventions really did nothing to improve the symptoms, and I felt very discouraged. I said to myself, well, I'm never going to see another therapist ever again. I'm done. I'm now in training to become one, because apparently, if you can't beat them, you join them. And so I lived with limerence for about another year, functioning okay, but not quite fulfilling my potential, either professionally or personally. And so, one day, I started to have panic attacks. Maybe related to limerence, maybe not, we don't know. But they became so debilitating, I was forced to try psychotherapy again, because there was nothing medically wrong. This time, I was adamant about choosing a cognitive behavioral therapist. The previous 2 therapists that I had tried both practiced a psychodynamic perspective, and I was adamant about trying something different. So the cognitive behavioral model, or CBT, rests on the premise that our thoughts affect our emotions, which in turn affect our behaviors. The consequences of our behavior then affect our thoughts. We can apply this to almost anything, not just limerence. So, for example, you might have a thought, that was such a stupid mistake, I'm such an idiot. And that leads to an emotion, probably anger. And that leads to behavior, I'm going to punch the wall. And that leads to a thought, I'm such an idiot, why did I punch the wall? So my new CBT therapist had never heard of limerence either. But she told me in our very first session, I'm willing to learn. That's when I knew she was different. I lent her my copy of Tenov's book, and we talked about the treatment approach together. It was never, I'm the professional, I know more than you, I'll be the one to tell you whether this condition is real or not. No. It was how do we make you more productive in the things you want to do in life. And so this is what really sets CBT apart from that more kind of traditional psychodynamic, psychoanalytic perspective. The therapist and patient work together as a team. When a lot of people think of psychotherapy, they see an image like this. But CBT can feel a lot more like this. So previous researchers, though there's only ever been a few of them, have recommended that you cut off all contact with your limerent object in order to overcome the condition. Similar to going through detox, you kind of make a clean break. In contrast, we took more of a harm reduction approach to limerence. Those recommendations to cut off contact are not based on evidence gathered in research studies, but on the judgment of the few clinicians and researchers who have written about limerence. That's not quite their fault. We simply don't have any methodologically rigorous studies on limerence from which to draw conclusions. In my case, we didn't want to cut off contact because the limerent object at that time was a coworker, and I would have had to quit my job to avoid them. That wouldn't have been a good career move at the time. It would have caused more problems than it solved. So in the absence of cutting off contact, was there anything else we could do to reduce the harm? I was a little skeptical because I really didn't know any other way of being. I had lived with this my whole life. But my panic attacks were gone. And so I really gained trust in this treatment modality. So the first thing we did was have me keep track of all the rituals that I performed that served to make me feel close to this person over the course of 2 weeks. And let me tell you what I mean by ritual. So, in that initial 2-week period, I checked this person's instant messenger status 101 times. I looked at a photo of them 70 times, talked about them 21 times, reread an email or text to or from them 16 times, walked past an area I was likely to see them 11 times, searched about them online 5 times, and re-listened to a voicemail once for a grand total of 225 distinct instances in 2 weeks. Then my therapist asked me to try to prevent a ritual if I could catch it in advance. And I noticed that when I became more aware that I was doing them, I gained more control over preventing them as they were about to start. But prior to that, who wants to guess how much time I spent on them? Oh, I'll tell you. Nearly 500 minutes, or over 8 hours in 2 weeks. That's one full work day, 8 hours, every 2 weeks. And this is just overt behaviors that could be measured. This is not daydreams or thoughts. We couldn't even measure those because it was so frequent. But 9 months after treatment, I was down to just 10 minutes spent on rituals in 2 weeks. So next, you remember from our triangle that our behaviors affect our thoughts. And we had started with the behaviors because those were easier to kind of quantify. But then next we turned to some thoughts that I had about this person. So they weren't all quite in touch with reality. For example, I might think, seeing this person in the middle of a panic attack will cure it. Or being their best friend forever is what it will take to make me happy. My therapist asked me to look at the evidence in support of and against each of these statements and come up with a thought that was a little more grounded in reality. So for example, I've had moments of joy that didn't involve this person, and I'll have them again. I wrote all of these down, and I carried that paper around with me for several months. When I felt tempted to do one of the rituals we talked about, I pulled it out and read it to myself. It worked, not every time, but it worked. So I was a little bit unique among therapy patients in that I'm also a researcher. And I wanted to know how well the treatment was working. So there aren't any standardized instruments that we can use for symptoms of limerence. So of course I created my own. And you'll see here that my scores reflect how many symptoms I was experiencing that were problematic. So that includes thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors, everything we've talked about. You can see here that during the 2-month period in which my therapist and I were actively treating my limerence, my scores went down in just a beautifully linear fashion. You wish all your data could look this nice. But it's an N of 1, so there you have it. I wasn't cured, but I was much better able to function. And I was a happier, more positive person. I couldn't have done it without my therapist, and I'm so glad that I gave therapy another chance. The treatment modality, in this case CBT, made a big difference to me. If you take nothing else away from this talk, know that a treatment that works for one person may not work for another, and there's more than one option. Don't be afraid to ask a clinician, what does the evidence say is the best practice for treating this? And is there more than one option? In my case, we didn't have the evidence about what works best for limerence. The studies don't exist yet, but they will. I'm working towards getting us there. I'm currently conducting a literature review of all standardized assessment tools that come close to identifying and quantifying aspects of pathological limerence. I will use these findings to tweak my original screener and then conduct a validation study with it. A validated screening tool will allow us to know how many people are affected, which we currently don't know. And it will also allow researchers to sort patients into treatment groups so that we can learn what works to help those who are struggling with this. Your therapist may have never heard of your condition, but that doesn't mean there isn't hope. There's a lot of suffering that comes with mental illness, whether it's depression, anxiety, limerence, substance abuse, psychosis, whatever. There's a lot of suffering, but there's always hope. Thank you.